nature, love and loneliness, which celebrate Meer Ki Dili. All the sessions have their title picked from the poetic utterance of Meer Taki Meer, and will explore the themes through ideas, thoughts, readings, discussions, and performances. All the sessions at Gandhi King Plaza today are geared towards an audience that look towards digital and visual media as a source of information, and how writers and journalists today keep their audiences engaged. Let's start with the first session for the day. It's called Aage Aage Dekhiye Hota Hai Kyaa. Thank you, Mrs. Rai. So the first session for the day is Aage Aage Dekhiye Hota Hai Kyaa. Watch what happens next. So in an age of wanting to be constantly abreast with politics, business, innovation, travel, entertainment, and more, the editors of 3 online publications discuss how a digital daily, opinion, and commentary platform cover the latest breaking news while keeping their literary skills intact and engaging readers. So we have 3 speakers here. The first is Diksha Madhok, the editor of Quartz India. She oversees content spanning the topics of business, technology, popular culture, and politics. Welcome, Diksha. The second is Jairaj Singh. He's a New Delhi-based writer and journalist. He's the editor of Daily O, India Today's opinion website, and co-consultant for Words in the Garden. Welcome there. The third speaker, we have Rohan Venkatam Krishnan. He's the news editor at Scroll.
You do. I want to know from each of you, what is the worst thing about being an online journalist? What do you hate the most about your job? Or let's say, what is the most challenging aspect about being an online journalist?
I think the primary thing that becomes really hard when I was a newspaper, the hardest bit is not being able to switch off, which we have to figure out how to moderate often with our teams and so on. But yeah, it's just, you're always on.
What about you, Diksha? I completely agree with what Rohan has said, that you really can't switch off in online journalism. But the other thing is that as an editor, apart from just thinking about stories, audience engagement or reader engagement is such a critical thing that like if you're working for a newspaper or if you're working for a magazine, you know that your subscribers are going to see the front page. They're going to open the newspaper and they will see the stories. When you work for an online platform, online-only platform, you have to think of ways to reach your audience. You have to reach their inbox. You have to reach their Facebook feeds, Twitter feeds, so that you get them to click. Not just get them to click. You have to first you have to just reach them. They're not going to your homepage. That's a myth. The homepage is actually almost dead. So you have to figure out how to reach these people, how to reach your readers. And you're competing with Facebook, you're competing with Snapchat content. So that's quite tough.
Everything that Rohan and Diksha said is basically, it's true, absolutely true. But I think that we're just always dealing with an unfinished product. It's never an edition. And I think, just to ensure that every time a fresh pair of eyes lays, on your website, that it has to look as if it's up to date. And sometimes that you're dealing with one story at a time, which is when a story goes out or somebody's reading that story, is just that story which speaks for you. It's never that, what was the lead of Express today this morning, and each story is a lead in a way.
Now, with Rohan and Jairaj, you've worked with newspapers before this. You worked with Hindustan Times. You were with Mail Today. Diksha, you have worked with Reuters, which isn't really a print space, but it's more a wire organization. What was your transition like, moving away from newspapers, a very traditional sort of a space, onto a digital platform? You want to take that? Yeah.
So, newspapers are built to structure things in a certain way. There's also a certain hierarchy within the newsroom City teams, I think, ought to be more important in newsrooms, particularly in Delhi, because newspapers ought to speak directly to their audiences. But there is a hierarchy where you start off with the city team, there's the desk, then there's the fancier political bureau, you have the editors who have their rhythms, you come in the morning around 11 for your morning meeting, an evening meeting at 6. You can decide things like what's on your front page and what you want your readers to read, like Jairaj and Diksha were saying. And the transition to digital is entirely different. One of the things I found most useful about the internet is that very often, because there is little direct understanding of circulation in your newspaper, people don't even send letters as much or emails, that you might be writing, but the only feedback you're getting is from your peers or from editors, which is a good thing because you get to hear from other people in the field, but it's also a bad thing because you're not hearing from the readers necessarily. So you start to write to your editors, you start to write for your peers rather than for the audience.
That happens a lot too. That's a familiar complaint against a lot of print or traditional media, that they write for their peers or for the bureau.
Because circulation does not immediately reflect. You might have been doing great city journalism for a week, but the circulation department is what gets that newspaper out there, right? On the internet, on the other hand, if you've done a great set of stories this week, you'll know immediately. Your readers are telling you right away whether it's good or bad, often very bad. You'll get plenty of feedback, negative immediately, but it's there. It's a more collaborative space. You get to hear quickly. The immediate feedback is not always a good thing, but by and large you tend to write more for your audience, which is what journalism's function is. It is not to impress your editor, but to actually convey information and knowledge to your reader. And so that transition has been a very positive thing, at least for me. It's where digital breaks open that idea that you're writing for this little set in Lutyens or the other journalists in other newsrooms. You're writing actually for your audience.
Do you feel that too, Diksha, that when you made the transition you were sort of more responsive to your readers and did that affect your writing style? I think, so at Quartz we have sort of dismantled the beat structure that exists in print media. So you have a reporter covering telecom, you have a reporter covering aviation. We have something called obsessions. So we feel that our audience, they are obsessing over different things, at like every few months there would be something else that they want to read about, and it would be a confluence of various beats. So for instance, when it comes to say something like the Cyrus Mistry Tata boardroom battle, it's a business story, but at the same time it's about leadership, it's about succession, it's and you need to put it's a more collaborative effort if you follow this type of a structure. And I think the way we are covering news in online is definitely changing. It's less rigid and it's way more collaborative. And also our newsrooms are way leaner. So the same person, like I have to figure out how to write about business, at the same time I have to figure out how to analyze data, how to visualize data. It's like you're a one-man band or a one-woman band. So yeah, the biggest difference. So your transition from
since I handle an opinion website, I think it's ironic because I remember when I was in the Hindustan Times, and the edit page was one of the least read pages in the newspaper. So much so that I think the Times of India at one time even threw it out and put it somewhere on the business side. So, to see how important that space for comment and, analysis is now today, I think that the India Today's idea of to create daily wars, to sort of sift, to create a big difference between news and opinion, because anyway, when you read today, you can't tell whether you're reading analysis or you're reading a report. We wanted to create a separate sort of space for that. So I think that, yes, that, it's very interactive, this space. The online space is, you get to know exactly what the reader wants, and that's, it cuts both ways, because sometimes you didn't want to know what the reader wants to, it was, for the print, it was very intuitive, and that was, so I would say that, that being, coming from the print media has helped in a way, because, it helps me put a semblance to where I am, you know, in online. I would have hated myself if I was just, starting from an online space.
So I just want to add that even when we were working, at least when I talk about myself, even when I was working with more traditional news organizations, everybody started talking about digital, everybody started talking about online journalism, but even 4 years ago, before people like Scroll or Quartz or Huffington Post entered India, digital journalism was like, अरे अपनी story online डाल दो और hyperlinks लगा दो.
It was a dumb basically.
That's it. And online journalists were considered technical journalists. Yeah. There was this concept of experimenting and figuring out how to reach your readers. That's very new.
But I don't know, you guys have spoken about structures. The newsroom is different from a traditional newsroom. News Laundry for about 3 years. Before that I was with Business Standard and DNA. The key thing that I felt change in me as a journalist was that I'm constantly evaluating myself today on the basis of, and this just happens because on the web there's so much feedback. You can always see how well your stories are doing, who's tweeting it, who's sharing it, who's saying what about it, how many hits. And I've started evaluating my worth as a writer and as a story, often on the basis of, too much on the basis of what's being said about it, how it's being shared. Does that happen with you guys? And do you think that
you're not just saying, you're trying to make a case for it. I think writing is the best way to air your leanings. Everything comes clear, In a piece, in a well-written piece, you know exactly, the person who's written it. I think that's also, people need that,
I think it's interesting that Jairaj brought up questioning, because I think it's something we struggle with a lot at Scroll, where we're often accused of being unnecessarily anti-establishment, anti-government, anti-BJP, anti-Modi. Over the course of JNU, we had lots of conversations about whether we felt that internally, whether we were not reflecting maybe a plurality of voices, and it's something we do make an effort to understand various viewpoints, but we also think it's worthwhile repeating. The danger on the internet is that saying the same thing over and over can start to sound old, right? So to constantly speak up for the fact that people have the right to say what they want can start to sound old. You need a fresh angle and a new headline, from a purely technical perspective. And yet, it is valuable to keep saying that. Sometimes to the detriment of your traffic, maybe to the detriment of your reputation, it is worthwhile going out there, getting a plurality of voices, ensuring that you're well-rounded in your coverage. At the end of the day, we're digital, but I think all of us here appreciate the utility of nuts and bolts ground reporters who will take the time to actually understand what's happening. And yet, if things are happening that you feel are problematic, if at Ramjas, something happens and then police beats up the journalists, right? There are certain lines where even if I'm saying it over and over again, if people are criticizing, it's worth saying it over and over again. At the risk of sounding shrill, I think sometimes, it is something we discuss constantly. That day I'm on 5 WhatsApp groups, and WhatsApp can often be a great thing for newsrooms and often a terrible thing, but the groups, many of them say left-wing activists in Delhi, can sound shrill all the time. So you can't really tell just paying attention to them whether this is the end of the world or tomorrow is the end of the world. So it's hard to gauge. We only understood what was happening in Ramjas with a reporter out there. Just basing stuff off of user-generated content is dangerous, but as Diksha points out, it's useful because you pay attention to how people are understanding and appreciating things. But at the end of the day, trying to handle that is very complex. It's easier in Delhi where you can send a reporter. If something happens in Madhya Pradesh, in Bihar, where maybe the newspapers, right, what's happening with the layoffs, what you guys reported is that local bureaus are shutting down. You don't have reporters everywhere. To then gauge whether we are getting the accurate story from someone saying that the ISI was responsible for, a train accident in Bihar or in UP. That's much more complex and it's a harder job for a news team to do it, especially Diksha pointed out that our teams are leaner, but that also means you have smaller budgets, you can't necessarily send people out to the field to report and figure out. You don't always have a trustworthy reporter in the region who can give you valuable information there. So it's a daily challenge. It's something that we grab.
When you guys are figuring out your news for the day, when you have your morning meetings, Do your jump in the ideas come from social media networks, or is it a mix of TV, print, and social media? How do you decide, okay, this is going to be the headline, this is going to be our main story for the day? Does that depend a lot on the conversations on social media, or on the front page story of a newspaper or a TV brief?
It's funny you mention this because last year I remember I was in Bihar and the journalists said the elections had just gotten over and I was talking to a lot of journalists, local journalists, and they were really upset because they were saying that what's happening is that they're being sort of steered away from the field because the editors, these local papers, the editors are more keen that they start doing stuff on what's trending on Twitter and stuff. So it's I think that it's right now we're really in a very transition stage. Where even it's not just online, which is just feeding off from what's going viral on Twitter and Facebook and that, but it's also like you're seeing it in print, because seeing how much print is being influenced by the stories that are trending, and it's again sometimes you see stuff that's actually gone viral on social media that ought to have been covered in newspapers and mainstream media that was never covered, but because the shill has gotten has got to it that it's important. Can't give an idea right now, but there have been many such stories. I don't know. I think even the newspapers.
I think Chennai floods was sort of a good example of where it became really important for everyone to. I don't know if floods would have been such a big thing on television, but it became really important on social media. With a lot of conversation. I think it got a lot of coverage to some extent because of social media.
Yeah, Jairaj points that the talk of sexual harassment in newsrooms and in other spaces. Similarly,
you wouldn't have had television talk about, you wouldn't have had primetime discussions on sexual harassment in the newsroom. Had it not been for,
So I feel that especially in newsrooms, because I think we don't like to talk about ourselves around. And I feel that this is where analytics, or knowing how to read analytics, is useful, because you get a sense of what your readers want. For instance, when the Chennai floods happened, we are a business news website, but we covered it quite aggressively because we knew we have readers from that part of the world. We knew there are a lot of Indian Americans who are from Tamil Nadu and who would be interested in that story, and we covered it. We covered it from all possible angles, and at the same time, I feel analytics helps us. Just also shows us that there are stories which we have been sort of trained into believing are important. For instance, after every union budget, I look at how those stories have performed, and I see, okay, they actually did not get as much traction. Like every newsroom goes crazy on the budget day. But do people outside journalism actually care as much about it as?
But then there's a danger there, because sometimes you need to make people care about things that they're not going to care about. So does that?
Maybe they don't care about it because it is not relevant in their lives. That as journalists we lose sight of sometimes.
So I think that it's true on both accounts. That there are stuff that there's a lot of flap that you have to get rid of, which mainstream does, which has never been accounted for. Who's reading or what is the impact? And then there's stuff that you need to do despite the fact that there are no numbers, or there are no, it's not important, or you may not, the Delhi people may not think it's important. Because like I said, on online, I think the joy is that you discover newer and newer audiences each and every day with newer and newer stories. You can find a pocket of readers anywhere in this world with one link which travels, and you can literally trace where it goes. So there's a certain joy in not also knowing that your audience is not limited, your readership is not just a particular pocket of Delhi or particular pocket of Bombay. It goes further and further.
And you can pin Disha's point down a little more particularly. I think she made a valuable point with the budget, which is that the budget speech doesn't matter as much to readers, right?
when you cover something, when we cover something on how then, what in the documents regarded to social welfare, whether you're getting your pensions or Narega, whether that's doing well, that story does much better and matters much more people than my instant analysis of the budget speech, which is government propaganda in its own way. It's a statement of account, but it is propaganda. It's an opportunity for government. And I think a lot of the newsroom is built around dealing with that day, the speech, rather than the next 3 days, the next 3 weeks of dealing with the accounts, the demands, the appropriations. And so we find this, like, we will still do the immediate analysis on the speech, try to understand what messages the government is sending out, but often that more measured understanding of what has happened in the previous year with regards to the actual budget, like, matters more to people and is more valuable to do as a journalist.
Do you think that traditional newspapers or traditional media still focuses on just what happened as opposed to, do you think digital does it better?
Digital is helping us figure out areas that traditional media never touched. It could be wildlife journalism, it could be science journalism, health journalism. I think all these new platforms are covering these areas which are very important and have been ignored for the last several decades in a very fresh manner.
Also, and there's a question for you, because it's also writing on the media. This is something that I remember 6-7 years back, nobody dared to question each other, or journalists were like holy cows, so how you being a news laundry which is completely focused on checking media and media ethics often.
Yeah, I don't think I'll get a job in a newspaper because or any other media, because where do I work? No one wants to talk about the media. And it is true that had it not been for News Laundry, an online space where I'm allowed to report on the media, whether on the layoffs, whether on, the basic salary structures, the way a newsroom functions, propaganda, conflict of interest.
How rape is covered.
Yeah, recently. So for me, I think right now traditional media, and it reflects often, because often for my stories when I call editors, they just tell me that what is it to you, like none of your business.
Yeah, you can see how condescending the big papers are, particularly on this. If you notice, they would rarely ever mention the names of their competition. And the big papers particularly will either say an English daily, or if they really want to be a leading English daily will be permitted.
I remember the TOI would say a sisterly publication for Hindustan Times.
Sisterly publication.
Yes. But this is something that...
but that's one thing great about the online space. We, at least the digital platforms, we always hyperlink, if someone else breaks a story, at least that's we attribute, which traditional media doesn't do.
So we can, again, this is something that as we've grown bigger at Scroll, we've tried to understand that actually, Disha was saying that the front page is dead or dying. The homepage is unexpectedly found that something like 20% of our audience is coming still through the front door. They're coming to the homepage, coming to Scroll.in, they're typing that in, rather than going to Facebook, Twitter, or wherever else. And what we found is people are actually relying on us as a destination. They want to come to us for news. But we have we're under no illusion that we are a destination, in the sense that we have a newsroom 1/10 the size of the Times of India. Or, we don't have reporters everywhere. And so it's very important for us to acknowledge that there is great reportage happening elsewhere, there's good opinion happening elsewhere. I run a morning newsletter that is aimed at pointing out that there is stuff out there that we haven't covered. As Disha points out, we find spaces that legacy traditional media doesn't cover, but we do not believe that we can replace them anytime soon. I find it very valuable that the Times of India, and more importantly, like language media, so Hindustan or Navbharat Times or Dinakaran, they are like employing masses of journalists across the country, and we rely on them to give us the news. We give you the analysis. We can often give you great reportage the day after, etc. But it does not gladden my heart to see legacy media dying or to see them shutting down offices.
Which is why I worry when traditional media, newspapers, mainstream newspapers are going the digital way and having leaner newsrooms, trying to do what us niche websites are sort of what we're good at. In the sense that, we still need very much the institutional strength of an Indian Express, Times of India, Hindustan Times, which has reporters in every in every district. You need these bureaus.
We need them to gather the news.
You need them to gather news because, in time to come, it won't be. I mean, of course, the spin and the analysis and the clever ways we can introduce and cover those stories. But you need the basic information first, like a Dadri story which shook India, I think, came from a newspaper. It came from Indian. It came from Express.
They gave it a lot of play.
And it was a bureau. It was a bureau story. It's a guy who goes and does his beat every day, and I think he found that story. I mean, the thing is that you need that. This we can't do. This you can't send somebody to find something. This is a story that's coming out of your beat. If that doesn't happen, or if that stops, then we are all in grave danger.
Which is why it's a little troublesome when you say that you met journalists in Bihar and they were being told by the editors that write on Twitter trends instead of getting news from the ground. But I want to touch on clickbait, something that we all look down on, but we all do. Is it inevitable because you need the numbers, you need people to click? A headline in an online platform is probably more important in a newspaper. I mean, it is still important in a newspaper, but there is still the blurb, the caption, the image that can draw in the reader.
The analogy for a newspaper is not the layout. The analogy for the newspaper is the circulation department. Headlines are our circulation online. No, but I mean that we distribute through the headline.
Yeah.
People see the headline the first. In print, you're subscribing to the paper or you're not. Online, our distribution mechanism is the headline. So it has to bear a lot of weight on its shoulders.
So also, when you say, so there are two things happening here. Even in India, we are looking at, how much time a reader has spent on that particular story. We've started doing it. And I think till maybe 2015, you could talk about clickbait because there would be readers who would click on 5 things that will blow your mind or something of that sort. But I think our readers are way more evolved now. They do not want lazy headlines. Yes, they want conversational headlines. They don't want jargon in the headline. They want to understand how this story, because if I'm spending 1.5 minutes on this story, I want to see in the headline why it is important to me. So you have to, the headline is the new nut graph, let me put it that way. But if you are saying that, I think you can get readers through a clickbait headline once, but really? Not again.
I click all the time, being a journalist. It happens to me all the time.
You can see it in the headline,
wow,
international organization.
Something and there's nothing.
Yeah, but you can see
will you go back to that?
You will not go back. You will not click on 11 things that will...
It's just too... It really traps you. I mean, it traps me. And being a journalist, I still fall for it all the time. So I'm wondering what regular readers...
Yeah, but you can...
Okay, how many of you have, as editors, do you sense when you're giving a clickbaity headline, have you done it deliberately? Don't say you've never done it.
Clickbait when I say something in the headline and the story doesn't deliver.
Yeah,
if the story has 11 charts on how India watches pornography, then that is what the headline is going to say.
Yeah. So that's more.
You can't.
That's fine.
See, you have to be somewhere between telling everything that the story. You can't reveal the entire promise of the story. Sometimes you have to. There should be some invitation. If it's going to say too much, and most people unfortunately just read the headlines and move on because they feel like they've got the entire story in the headline. And if you look at Twitter, people are mostly on stories. When they say it's gone viral on Twitter, I never trust it because I know my analytics are telling me that people are just responding to that bloody headlines. They're just responding to the headline. They only react to the headline. So your headline has to, it can't reveal too much. It shouldn't reveal too much, but it should at least, it should sort of pique the audience.
But to ground that discussion, I learned most about clickbaity headlines from working at a tabloid newspaper. Not working online. Mail today, yeah, absolutely. We were told institutionally that your headline has to be 3 steps ahead of the story. And the front page headline has to be far ahead. Often the promise of the story doesn't bear out when you actually read it. And on the internet I do less and less.
We don't talk about that enough, but newspapers have been clickbaiting, not clickbaiting, but
the Telegraph does great work,
yes.
But very often that banner, 6-column headline every morning is often misleading. It's not. We're not going to war every day, right? And so print has done this for years and years. On the internet, fads tend to go up and down, as Diksha was pointing out. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the Upworthy, you'll never believe what happens next headline was all over the place, and it's disappeared because people know that they will believe what happens next. So.
Okay, time's up. So we take questions if there are any. Any questions? Yes, please, ma'am. Is there anyone who... Can we get a mic for the lady here?
I think it is one of the most beautiful and wonderful warning that has made me listen to the 4 young people in media. And what has amazed me is that each one of you has acknowledged the trainings that you've had in the traditional media and the sadness expressed by each one of you that they should never close down. My only worry was that I think it was Diksha who was talking about the numbers and the statistics about the JNU incident. But I'm sure each one of us would agree that research has undergone a tremendous amount of change. That is, to keep the balance between the numbers and the qualitative analysis, because it is the quality that gives the more holistic picture of an incident that has taken place. Now, when we were discussing about the issues that were being taken up by the media on the social media, I was a little upset when the Nirbhaya incident was shortly mentioned by few of the newspapers and totally forgotten by the public at large. But it was only Maitri College students who were performing in the buses. So at least the information was there that people are trying to keep the issues close to their hearts, the issues which need to be aggressively addressed. My second concern has been, are we giving the adequate coverage to the losing of the girl child in the fetus? We've been occasionally reading about those, whenever...
I think that, that's one thing that the websites are doing, and especially I have to say about those Scroll and Quads, I think that they take on issues where often mainstream doesn't venture. In fact, I think one of the best coverages on Chhattisgarh and that region is Scrolls, and you should read these actually just to get a sense of how, it's not to say that these things are not, this is a very valid concern, but if you start sort of seeing that there's been a monumental shift in the way, coverage. My own father says, you guys never cover this, never cover that, and he keeps saying these things. But the fact of the matter is that a lot has changed in the last couple of years.
When it comes to covering women at the workplace or women in business, I don't think any of the mainstream newspapers ever gave that subject this much importance. But at Quads, at Scroll, this is our obsession. We're constantly talking about it. We're putting it on our homepage, and I don't know. And I felt regarding the JNU incident, I'm not saying that ground reporting is not equally important, but I'm just saying that for long, data has not been given the importance that it deserves in Indian journalism, and now with online, we are exploring that as well.
One of the questions that most annoyed me in the newsroom, in a traditional newsroom, was profile Kyaa, which is that if there was a fire in a slum in outer Delhi and 200 houses are burnt down, and if one upper class girl got abducted and returned in South Delhi, we will give more importance to the second story and not the first story. That is not a question that comes up in our newsroom, and this is something that makes me very happy.
That's
in the Scroll
true.
newsroom, if we think it matters to people, you don't have to ask profile Kyaa. Do you think whether can we do a good job of reporting this? Yes or no, that's another matter. But we don't care that much about those little things in terms of your target group and your audience.
Next question. Yeah, can you please?
Hello. My question is not targeted at one particular individual. Anyone of you can answer it. It's rather related to the economics of, say, online portals. And I remember a couple of years back, the previous editor-in-chief of Guardian was in India, and he was asked this question about, how in UK, I mean, the print publication is literally, as well as in US, and he said that it would be better for, Indian market to understand this is going to happen to you as well. But there was this assurance, we felt that, look, we're yet to penetrate into rural India. The print has not penetrated to that extent. So considering that in mind, we will not sort of have that impact on, say, print. But now we are seeing the layoffs as well in Hindustan Times and Telegraph, and now I think Indian Express is also planning to have one in the near future. And I remember Subhiya Sharma writing about it a couple of years back in Caravan in Vantage about how the economics of, say, an online portal, wherein the advertising rates are much less comparatively. And of course we have different paywall, native advertising. So how that affects, say, the working, wherein, say, there is no different marketing department at times where you also have to think, that how native advertising is what kind of native advertising is gonna be there. That is one question. And the other one is in the context, you also talk about having a pluralistic, opinions on, but how the feedback sort of affects, for example, every time you're covering Ramjas and you sort of share that via your Twitter account, there will be like 100 people sitting telling you, look, you people are killing us in Kerala, and that's why we are doing this to you in Ramjas. So how does that affect the content itself over a longer period of time?
Answer to the second question is that you just have to be thick-skinned, because the amount of abuse and the threats and the death threats and all these things that they said.
And what about me for that?
And what about me, and what about me, and what about this, and what about that?
So I have to have a slightly different take on this. I pay a lot of attention to the trolls, to every negative comment that I get on Facebook or on my story, because I think it's important to see. And often I feel that not all the criticism is always, you can't just brush it aside and say, oh, what about me or this person. I think it helps a journalist to be aware of opposing points of view, even if you have a position. And at News Laundry, we feel that we have positions. It's not possible to not have a bias, but you can be fair. And you can report both sides, and you can be transparent. We aim towards transparency rather than saying that we don't have any biases. So for me, I pay a lot of attention to all the negativity, just to keep myself abreast with the conversations and the criticism that I get for whatever.
Even if that means being called prostitute or secular.
I ignore the abuse, but if someone.
Very inventive.
But I don't think we can shut ourselves off to the anger also that the media gets, because a lot of it is our fault. We have been completely unaccountable to people. We practice really horrible practices like not issuing corrections, often carrying out propaganda, not being transparent enough. So I do think that a lot of mistrust in media we deserve, and we need to start addressing that.
I think this is the worst time to be a journalist. I mean, the last few years, ever since 2014, I wonder why. It's also been like, it's terrible to be a journalist. There's complete distrust. We've also, we've caused this, but it's that, nobody trusts journalists anymore. And the fake media, Trump's declaring a war there. I think a lot of what's happening in America is we're on familiar grounds here. I think they're going through everything that we're going through in that sense.
I was actually looking at Tinder data. And in India, journalism is one of the least desirable professions right now. Nobody wants to marry a journalist.
Nobody wants to screw a journalist.
But I think
it's also the most exciting time to be a journalist in that sense, right? You are under the gun. It gives you a sense of purpose. You can see what's happening to newsrooms in the States, for example. That certainly there's a lack of trust in the wider public. But within your understanding of what you're doing, it becomes a little clearer. Maybe that you're not out there to necessarily sell propaganda. You're out there to question. You're out there to speak truth to power.
I also feel like somewhere, we know what, links as an editor, I can tell you what link not to open, no matter how clickbaity the headline. But at some level, it's become crazy. I think there's so many new, each and every website does not hold any editorial standard or values that we would sort of are brought up upon, basically. I think because anybody who has a website is in the realm of content and content farming and these new sort of jargon to describe what editorial policies. It just goes all over the place. You know, I feel like they take viewpoints, they do stories which are only certain stories. I feel like it's become a WhatsApp forward is almost taken as seriously as a news report, and I think that somewhere. I know that the audience is also getting smarter, but there's also so much of it in the air that you don't know what you're reading, where you read it from also, you know.
But I did want to answer the other question also there, which was at least with Scroll, and this is true for Pause, it's for a few other places, we don't think about native advertising. There is a separate team that looks at that. We have no connection to them in the sense they sit in the same office, but no editorial staff works on the native advertising side at all. There is a very clear separation, I think a better separation at Scroll than there is at the Times of India between what is marketing and what's reportage. But it's certainly true that the ecosystem is breaking down. It's becoming harder to actually run news organizations. At the same time, one of the most exciting things about being at Scroll for me is that we are selling ads, we're selling expensive ads that are good enough to actually sustain good journalism. Places like News Laundry where they're experimenting with a paywall, where in traditional media often the entertainment and sports pages are subsidizing the news coverage. You are not always necessarily paying for what you're getting. You're spending 2 rupees, that's more going to the newsprint and the paper than it is towards the journalism. What we are trying to what we're attempting here is to actually get people to either pay for journalism or to get valuable journalism out there that's sustainable, and it's actually an exciting part of the job, but also you have to be very optimistic.
And also I think that this is something that is not told often enough. The story of online journalism is not just about experimenting with the editorial, it's also about experimenting with ads, with business models. Native advertising, I've never met a reader who said that I'm confused by the native ad. I think it's part of the editorial. I've never had someone say that to me, but I have had people who have said that, the ads look beautiful and we feel like clicking and reading. So it's a better experience for the consumer as well. And I think that's worth talking about.
The gentleman there.
Sorry, I bumped into it. I was in the conversation. Complete desire to interact with other people instead of being confined to my own area. I must have discussed it earlier. Very general question. Do you see the whole idea of newspapers are going to go away altogether, or like photographers find? I really hope not. I hope not.
We just discussed that we hope they don't.
But the print product might go away. Right? I think the news organizations will find a way. Not anytime soon. Not anytime soon in India, but it's possible that people will. I mean, what happened in America was the same. People thought it wouldn't disappear, and then in a matter of a decade, right, like massive amounts of actually what disappeared was the classified advertising business, which then made sure that the print product barely was there anymore, relatively. But I do think news organizations have an advantage by looking at the West and understanding how they're adapting, because we have maybe a 10 or a 15-year head start on the West in waiting for our print products to die fully. That maybe they'll crack the business model and we can sort of adapt it here.
Small business. Very small. Very interesting. I remember Punjab Kesari printing in the front page always the film news earlier. I don't know. Punjab Kesari, I found, I'm from Bengal, I came across this newspaper prints, the first page is about films, and then the other newspapers. So there's a tactic, I think, you're
maybe some actor had said something? Was it just a film, or was it because
no.
actors do often...
No. What I mean is,
coverage.
First page of Punjab Kesari was not headlines of novel headlines. First page was film. Not the third page.
At my student newspaper in college, we increased circulation by, it was a tiny paper, it was 10,000, we increased it by 2,000, which was a big increase for us, by putting the weather on the front page and the Sudoku on the back page, because people in class wanted to do the Sudoku and see the weather in the morning.
So that's a serious tactic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so our time's up. Thanks so much for listening to us. Thanks a lot.